Learning Beis Halacha. Let's go from Pesach, page Samach Hey. Shachtu lemulim zorg adam l'shem ha'relim. Now we'll go to the Peirush. By slaughtering the animal at the time of slaughtering the Korban Pesach, and he slaughtered it for the people who were circumcised. The Korban Pesach cannot be eaten by somebody who's not circumcised, and not by a goy at all. But even a Jew is not circumcised. And they spray the blood for a combination of those who are circumcised and those who are not. It's possible, because it says "Kol or lo yechol boy." Rambam says it's possible. Shazrika chamuro. The main aspect of a korban of any offering is always the zrika, the atonement that takes place at the end with the spraying of the blood. Shehiga korban. That is the main atonement of the korban. What happens if he slaughtered it for those who are circumcised? And he had in mind at the time of slaughtering that those who are uncircumcised should have atonement. Posel. It is posel because the Rambam says that when you're doing you have a thought of about the zrika at the shlit, you're putting in there arelim, and arelim cannot be atoned for with the Korban Pesach because they're not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach. Shachtu le'oichlov. Now the Rambam doesn't mention those who are uncircumcised, but rather those who are allowed to eat from the Korban. Again, to spray the dam at the time of the shlit, he's thinking about spraying the dam, not for those who can eat it. HaPesach is kosher. The Pesach is kosher. Why? Because the idea of not is different than the circumcised or uncircumcised, because eating only has to do with the shchito, has nothing to do with the zriko. The slaughtering makes a person able to eat it or not. There is a different problem. There's a problem with the text here. That's where the korban is kosher and a person cannot fulfill his obligation. But our text in the Gemara is that a person does fulfill his obligation, because there is no concept of thinking about ochlin by atonement, because the spraying of the dam doesn't have to do with those who eat it. It has to do with the people who are the owners. Hilchos Chametz explains the reason that shchita makes it possible, because the main aspect of Pesach is to eat it. The action of shchita is what makes a person able to eat it. This is what we learned in the previous halacha. And hey, the Rae Gann disagrees with the Rambam. Amar Avram. That was the Rae Gann's name was Avram. This is not la halacha. What he says that if he slaughtered it and he threw the dam, he sprayed the dam for a mix, it's possible. That's not la halacha. Ravashi do basra. Ravashi is the one who closed the Gemara. He's the final Ameir. Kaposik, and he codifies that if it's a combination of those who are circumcised and those who are not, it does not matter by the shchita or by the zriko. The animal is kosher. The korban is kosher. Because the Mishnah explains, according to his text, that the Gemara in Sochem 78b is that we find a disagreement between Rav Chisda and Rabba. By Korban Pesach, they slaughtered it to eat it, to feed it to people who are circumcised. At the same time, they thought at the time of the slaughtering that they will spray it to atone also for those who are uncircumcised. Rav Chisda says posel, and the Rambam here says that you can have a concept of doing it for the wrong people at the time of zrika, and that would be the people who are uncircumcised. That the thought of zrika for those who are uncircumcised nullifies the korban. Rabbi says it's kosher, because he's of the opinion that the concept of circumcision has nothing to do with zrika, it has to do with the ownership, and therefore it doesn't nullify the Pesach. Rabbi learned that it's kosher from a brisa, Where's the brisa? Because there's a posuk that said, the brisa brings down v'chol oral lo yechol boy. No, the uncircumcised may not eat from the korban pesach. V'ne'ama, and there's a posuk in the brisa, yochel yivsel oral es b'nei achabura aboim imoy, that I might think that the uncircumcised carries with him the psul, not to nullify all the others that are gathered with him. Remember, korban pesach has a group of people eating it, owning it, and eating it, as opposed to other karbonos. Talmud Loima is a posuk in Shmoyis, Zois Chukas HaPesach. Now, Rabbi learns that the whole oral comes to teach you only if he didn't have in mind anyone who's circumcised, that everyone was uncircumcised. But at the time of the shchita, he thought only about those who are uncircumcised. That's why the korban is possible. But I thought on some of them being kosher, some of them being uncircumcised, does not nullify the korban. But by Zriko, there's another posuk. When it comes to sprinkling the blood, it says Zois Chukas HaPesach. Now it comes to be more lenient. That by Zriko, even if he only thought for Arelim, it doesn't take any effect. So going to Rabbo, the concept of Arelim, the forbiddenness, as we'll see, is because they can't eat it. And that's only by Shchita, not by Zriko. Now, if you'll ask, why is Shchita different from Zriko? Why is slaughtering different than spraying? The answer is that Shchita, we find the concept of eating. A person, according to his eating, shall be counted. That from there we learned that the Shchita has to be for those who can eat it. Therefore, if he slaughtered a Pesach for uncircumcised, it's considered that he slaughtered the Pesach for someone who cannot eat it. And it's possible. But by Zriko, the posuk that apostles oral, there's no posuk. It's only talking about eating. Therefore, if he thought about uncircumcised at the time of Zriko, according to Rabbo, there is no thought of oichlin b'Zriko. It has nothing to do with eating. It has to do with one who is a member and counted on it. Rav Chizda disagrees. He has the exact opposite logic. Zois tells us to be stringent. That by Zriko we have to be stringent. B'chol oral tells us that by Shchita we can be lenient. That only if all of them are uncircumcised, then it's possible. But when some of them are circumcised and some are not, it's not possible. And if you'll say, well, by Zrika the same should apply, so it says Zois. The word Zois comes to be more stringent. That only in Shchita the thought of having some arelim doesn't pass. But by Zrika, even if you're thinking of some of the people being uncircumcised having atonement from the korban pesach, it nullifies the korban. And if you'll ask why should Zrika be more stringent than slaughtering, so the Gemara explains that we learn this from pigul. Pigul is when you think to eat it outside of its proper time frame. We see that can only take place by Zrika, because the din of pigul, if he slaughters it, or he receives the blood, or he brings the blood to the mizbeach on condition to eat from the blood after the time that you're supposed to eat the animal, after the time that you are allowed to, it doesn't have a din of pigul. And the one who eats from it is not chayav koros. But when it's maybe a postal animal, but a postal korban, but it's not koros. But when it was sprayed the dam with a thought to eat it outside of the proper time, it has a din of pigul. And the one who eats from it is koros. It has a chayav koros, as the punishment of koros. Thus we see that the spraying has a more stringent rule to it than the other three avodas of slaughtering, accepting the blood, and moving the blood. That's what tells us when it is pigul. Therefore, according to Rav Chizda, even mitzvahs reilim are also possible. Thus we see that Rab is of the opinion that Shchita Pesach is more stringent. And therefore, if it's Kuloi Orlo Poisel, that only Kuloi Orlo is Poisel, but Zrika, even Kuloi Orlo, Abbas says Shchita is more stringent, and therefore only if all of them are uncircumcised at the time of the, if you're thinking for people that are uncircumcised at the time of the slaughtering, it's possible. And by spraying, even if it's all uncircumcised, it doesn't pass. because there is no concept of eating with regard to Zrika. Zrika has to do with the ownership. According to him, the reason why our Elam can't eat from the Korban Pesach is because they're not capable of eating from it, not because they can't be owners of it. Rav Chisda is of the opposite opinion, that spraying is the more stringent, and even if some of them, when he sprayed it, he thought of some people who are uncircumcised, it nullifies the korban. But by shchita, he learns in the posuk that it's only possible when he thinks only for Aredim. Rav Chisda, the psul of oral, is not because of achila, but because of the fact that he's an uncircumcised Jew. The Mishnah says, the Rambam paskins ke Rav Chisda lahachmir. He's of the opinion shochter lemulim, that if he slaughtered it for those who are circumcised, and he sprayed the blood for those who are circumcised and uncircumcised, it's possible, because the zrika, the spraying, is more stringent. That's the main aspect of the korban, the atonement, the finalization of bringing the korban. Therefore, he writes that if he slaughtered it for circumcised, in order that it should atone for those who are uncircumcised, it's possible, because there is a concept of arelim and zrika. But according to Rava, this would not apply. According to this understanding of the Kesef Mishnah, that the Rambam codifies halacha because there is a concept of arelim and zrika. It has nothing to do with the food aspect, and when it comes to if he sprays it for people who are going to eat it, it has nothing to do with zrika. That we see that oral has its own standing as to why it's possible, and therefore the question is, why does he codify the law that if he slaughtered it and thought that at the time of slaughtering it that the zrika should be not for those who can eat it, it is kosher. However, when he thinks at the time that the zrika should be and Pesach it's possible, we must say that the Rambam is of the opinion, like Rav Chisda, that Arelim is a separate concept from Oichlan. We see from the Rambam's Psak that not for those who eat it would be kosher. For people that are uncircumcised, it would be possible. And therefore, there's a special unique forbiddenness or aspect that would negate the korban if a person is uncircumcised. Kesef Mishnah says that the Raiva disagrees because the Rambam paskins like Rav Chisda. It's not like La Halacha. Why? Because Rav Ashi, as we mentioned, it was the latest of the Amoraim, and Halacha is, according to him, questions on Rav and Rav Chisda here in the Gemara. He had questions on both of them. How do they clarify v'chol oral means that if all are uncircumcised? Only if he thinks all of them, it negates it. Maybe v'chol oral means even if some of them. And the Lechem Mishnah cites from many different places that we find this question of whether v'chol is interpreted as being everyone. It must be totally for this one aspect of uncircumcised, or it means even any aspect of any. If there are 100 people and one is uncircumcised, it would nullify the negate the korban. Now, even if he thought for circumcised and also for those that are not circumcised at the time of shchita, the korban would be possible, according to the Rav Ashi, because the word kol, you can explain it even if some of them are uncircumcised. The Avodah Torah says zois to tell you no, only if all of them are. That's when it's possible. So it seems Rav Ashi would be saying that because it says zois, it tells you they all have to be uncircumcised to be possible. And this psul of arelus, of uncircumcised, would take effect both by shchita or by zrika, if all of them are uncircumcised. Rav Ashi concludes, because of his question, that Rav Chisda and Abba do not disagree with the idea of what v'chol oral means. Does it mean the entirety must be uncircumcised or partially so? And nor what Zois comes to tell us, but the disagreement of Rav Chisda and Abba is how to explain the posuk and all the karbonos. That it shall be accepted for him to atone for him. We learn from this that pigul is olav, means you have to do it for the owner and not for somebody else who's similar to the owner. And it's called a machshavas. When you do it for somebody else, it's called shinui balim. Rabbo is of the opinion that if it's somebody else, he's thinking about it has to be somebody else. If it's a Jew and a goy, the other person is not equivalent, and therefore it would not take effect. Just like the Jew has to be atoned for, it can be atoned for, his chaver has to be able to atone for, if it would be his korban. Thus, an uncircumcised person that cannot be on the Pesach, for the Torah forbade to bring a korban Pesach for an uncircumcised person. Therefore, rabbis of the opinion that the uncircumcised is not obligated in korban Pesach, meaning he's not part of the equation, and he's not called similar, and therefore he's not called shaloi lebalim. Rav Chisda disagrees that the concept of an oral negates because it's considered similar, because he could circumcise himself and bring a korban Pesach. He has the ability to do so. Therefore, when he thought to do it for an oral, it's possible because it's shaloi shinui balim. And the disagreement between Rav and Rav Chisda is only regarding the atonement of the korban, that the machshava of change of balim should be somebody similar to him. And if this depends whether an uncircumcised person is considered somebody who's obligated with a Pesach, but there's something holding him back from doing it. And Rav Chisda is the opinion that's the situation, because he can circumcise himself. Rav is the opinion that he's not considered included in the equation at all. And therefore, going to Rabbah, Arelim doesn't take any effect even by Zrika. According to this understanding, the Raiva disagrees with the Rambam, that he's going against the Halacha, because how could the Rambam say the Halacha is like Rav Chisda? Rav Ashi, who is the final statement on the Shas, would seem to say that Halacha is all, and Halacha is always like the ladder, is of the opinion that a bit of Orlo does not nullify, negate the korban. It doesn't matter by Zriko, by spraying of the blood, or by slaughtering. How the Rambam is saying that a partial Orlo does nullify by Zriko, like Rav Chisda, when that is not the understanding of Rav Ashi. Now, the Kesef Mishnah questions this allegation of the Raiva. Where does the Raiva know that Rav Ashi actually adheres to this conclusion? Even Rav Ashi said only maybe we can interpret it this way. Why does the Raiva state so forcibly that Rav Ashi says that if it's only partially for Arelim, it does not nullify, it has to be all. Therefore, the Kesef Mishnah says the Rambam was the opinion that really the Gemara is according to Rav Chisda, that even if you spray it for Arelim, even a bit of them, it also passes, and therefore he says so by Zriko. Furthermore, we learn in the Gemara, after Rav Ashi questions this question, the Gemara says, how does Rav Chisda explain this? And they answer. And usually when the Gemara goes ahead, back to the Machloikis, and they go according to one side, it would seem that the disagreement between Rav Chisda and Rabbah is whether a partial mixture of non-circumcised either at the time of Shchita according to Rabbah or at the time of Zrika according to Rav Chisda, that's the disagreement. Which is more stringent? The Rambam paskins like Rav Chisda, that a partial mixture of Arelim by Zrika passes, and it's only by Shchita only Kuloi Orlo. The Marie Korkus writes another reason why the Rambam doesn't pass like Rav Ashi, because the foundation that Rav Ashi has, you can explain kol oral, meaning even not everyone has to be uncircumcised, but even any part, and therefore if he had a combination, it would still be possible. The Rambam doesn't accept that explanation elsewhere. In Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah it says he translates kol has to be totally so. What does this apply to? We have 10 people who killed together one person. In Sanhedrin 78a, the Rambam says they were all potter from being killed because the pasuk says, "V'ish ki yaki kol nefesh adam." If a person will just kill, strike the entire soul of a person until he does the entirety. Yudim Sava, or Yudim Sava translates kol, meaning even partially so. Thus, Rambam is going according to his line of reasoning that kol means all of it, and therefore he doesn't say like Rav Ashi. That's what the Lechem Mishnah says. So Marie Korkes questions the language that we find Shazrika Chamura Shi Ikar Hakom. The Rambam writes that spraying of the blood is more important because it is the main offering. Why did the Rambam change his reasoning? According to the Gemara, Avchizda is more stringent by Zrika, not for that reason, but because that's when the korban can become pigul, and not because that's the main purpose of the korban. So Rabbi Korka says that the Rambam uses this language. We find this often that the Rambam uses that which is more plausible, understandable, as opposed to the actual reasoning. And furthermore, that if he has to start to explain pigul, the establishment of pigul as the main part of the korban is not easily understandable, and therefore he used the concept that we find that the ultimate conclusion of the making the korban a sacrifice is the zrika. Rabbi Kiva explains that the Rambam Paschal is like Avchizna, like the Rosh. Whenever there's a disagreement between Avchizna and Rabbah, the Rosh says that Avchizna is the halacha because he was greater than Rabbah. The Chavetz Chaim questions, why did Avchizna and Rabbah have a disagreement by where he slaughtered, and his intent was to spray the blood also for those who are uncircumcised. Even if we just think at the Zrika itself, why does he mention the concept of at the time of slaughtering he had in mind the spraying? Well, Simon answers that he wants to tell us the thought in Rav Chizda that even though at the time of the spraying itself he didn't think about anything, and the thought that's not correct was done at the time of slaughtering as opposed to at the spraying, still it nullifies the korban. Rabbi Chaim Alevi Brisk points out that the Chavetz Chaim infers from Rav Chizda is actually a machloikis, a disagreement between Rambam and Tosfos. The Rambam's opinion is that the thought of Arelim is a unique psul by the work of the Korban Pesach, and it has nothing to do with Shaloi Lo'echlov, that they can't eat it. And therefore, at the time of the Shechita, he thought about spraying for Arelim, it's possible. So the same rule would apply if at the time of Zrika he thought about Arelim. It would nullify the offering, because the Rambam goes according to his opinion that Shochto Lishmo, if he slaughtered it correctly, and he thought at the time of Shechita to spray the blood not for that korban, it's possible, because there's this concept of transferring a wrong thought from one of the four aspects of the service, which is slaughtering, receiving, bringing, and spraying. And if any one of these can be transferred to the other thought, and the thought that he thought that he had in his mind at the time of Shechita, at the slaughtering for those who are uncircumcised, it's as if he did it for the Zrika itself, and not because Arelim has anything to do with the fact that they can't eat the korban. However, Tosfos of the opinion only if at the time of Shechita he thought for originally to slaughter it for those who are circumcised, but the korban should also be fulfilled or atoned for those who are uncircumcised in the spring. There, Rav Chisda passes, because according to the Tosis, the psul of machshavas arelim is because of shaloi lo-oichlov. It's because it's not for shaloi lo-oichlov. It's not for those who are going to eat it. That the psul at the time of shchita, it can only happen for arelim because shchita makes it possible to eat, and arelim cannot eat. But at the time of zrika, if you thought about arelim, it wouldn't have any effect because there's no thought of people not being able to eat applying at the time of spraying the blood, and therefore, according to Tosis, the korban would be kosher. This rule that's brought down, that you can transfer thought from one of the 4 steps in the service of the korban from one to the other, is brought in the Gemara Sochim 60 and Sochim 10, and we have to understand if what happens is that the thought that he thought about the other avodah at the time that he was doing the first avodah. There's 4 steps. At shchita, which we'll call step number 1, he thought of something wrong in step number 4, would cause the service, the korban, to be this posel, as if he did it now, or that certainly this avodah only becomes possible without machshava, because he thought about the other number 4. If when he does number 4, and he also thought about doing it incorrectly, then it becomes possible. The question is whether we say it takes effect now, or only takes effect at the end when he does the zrika. So Rav Chaim says that the Rambam would seem to say specifically that the service that he thought to do the psul, that's what causes the korban to be invalidated, because he writes this is the thought that he did at the time of shchita, and it says if he did it by zrika. He doesn't write the reverse. But what he thought on the zrika passes by shchita as if he did it regarding the shchita. So he places the blame of the invalidation of the korban on the zrika not having anything to do with the shchita. So you're seeing that the avodah which nullifies the korban is not the slaughtering, but actually the zrika, because he thought about it at the time of the shchita. For the Rambam mentions that the thought that it nullifies is by the zrika and not by the slaughtering. It proves that the Rambam learns the according to Chisda the aspect why arenim nullifies, uncircumcised nullifies by zrika is unique on Pesach, that you can't offer it for arelim, and it has nothing to do with food. Again, it has nothing to do with the ability whether they're able to eat it or not, even though they're not able to eat it, because the oichlin is, as we learned earlier, is something that can only nullify by shchita. And if we're going to say that somebody who's uncircumcised has no effect on zrika, then it wouldn't take any effect on zrika. So you must say, according to the Rambam, it has its effect on zrika. What's seen from this novel approach of Chaim, according to Tosis, even though that arelim at zrika would not passel, because arelim, according to Tosis, is negates the korban because they can't eat, and that's only at slaughtering. But since he thought at the time of shchita about doing this, the spraying for arelim when he gets the zrika, but he thought about it by shchita, according to Tosis, it's as if he now nullified the korban, because according to Tosis, the thought of transferring from one avodah to the other doesn't mean, like we learned by the Rambam, that it transfers from the wrong thought at step 1 nullifies step 4, but rather the wrong thought of step 1 about step 4 nullifies step 1. What the Rambam writes, that he slaughtered it, if he slaughtered it for those who are circumcised, and he sprayed the blood for a mixture of those who are circumcised and not, it's possible. So we see that even some of them, even a little bit passels, even if some people are uncircumcised, it would nullify the korban. So Reb Chaim questions, why does he continue to say that if he slaughtered it for uncircumcised, that the atonement should be for arelim it's possible? It would seem that he's talking about only arelim, not a mixture. But mixas would not passel, just like we said before. The Rambam says kol means completely so. So Chaim says he relies on what he wrote previously, that there's no difference between kula orlo to machshava of partial orlo. He only comes to tell us that he's emphasizing this new aspect that one can carry over a wrong thought from one service 1 to service 4. Chaim also gives us a novel idea that it would seem that he writes specifically he slaughtered it for circumcised, so that the uncircumcised will have atonement by Zrika, because according to the Rambam, the main reason the offering is invalidated is because at the time that he thought about the invalidation, that's what caused it to happen. That's when it takes effect. The Rambam says is of the opinion that partial orla only affects Zrika and not Shchita. Therefore, when he thought at the time of Zrika to do it for partial aredim, it's possible. But when he thought at the time of the Shchita to do it for partial aredim, it doesn't possible, because the machshava for partial aredim at the time of Shchita doesn't passel Shchita, so it can't transfer to step 4. If in step 1 it doesn't nullify it, it wouldn't nullify it in step 4. And therefore, when at the time of slaughtering he thinks about the service of Zrika for partial orla, it would not nullify. But Chaim at the end says that that's not valid, and you have to look at it would seem confusing whether the Rambam requires total orla to nullify Zrika or even partial. The Amari Korkus cites the source for the Rambam's words that he slaughtered it for those who could eat it, and he wanted to atone for those who cannot eat it. The Pesach is kosher, and however, a person does not fulfill his obligation, because by Zrika there's no concept of for those who can't eat it. We find this in the Gemara, 78b. If he slaughtered it for those who are going to eat it, to spray the blood for those who are not going to eat the zevach, it is kosher. And therefore, when he sprays for those who are uncircumcised, it negates, just like if he sprays for those who cannot eat it. That's the way the Mari Korkus learns it. Today's questions in 61a, according to their thought, that the why an oral and uncircumcised is possible is because he can't eat it, not because it's a unique factor. Rav Chisda says that if he slaughtered it for those who are circumcised, with a thought to spray the blood, that those who are uncircumcised should be atoned, the korban is not negated. So how does that work together with the words of the Gemara? that if you slaughter it for those who are going to eat it, which are those who are circumcised, with a thought to spray the blood for those who are not circumcised, not going to eat it, which according to the Balei Tosis means also the uncircumcised, and it could be that it means uncircumcised. The korban is kosher. According to Tosis, it should be possible. Therefore, the Tosis have to change the text in the Gemara. He slaughtered it for those who are going to eat it, and rather than to say to spray it for it, and he did so, and not that he thought about doing it in step 4, but he actually did so in step 4 for those who are not going to eat it. The zever is kosher, because as we mentioned earlier, the thought of not those who can't eat it has no application to the zrika itself. But Tosis are of the opinion, according to Rav Chizda, if at the time of the shchita he thought to do it for those who can't eat it, the korban is possible, because in shchita there's a concept of shaloi la'echlov, and therefore it nullifies it, even though he's thinking about step 4. But according to the Rambam, that if he thinks about spraying it for arelim, arelim is a unique aspect by itself, having nothing to do with eating. If he thought at the time of slaughtering to spray the blood for those who are not going to eat it, the korban is kosher. But if he thought to spray it for those who are arelim, who are uncircumcised, it doesn't matter. Both by zrika, both by shchita, the korban is possible, because it's a category which nullifies by shchita and nullifies by zrika. The Mari Korkus therefore explains that the Rambam wrote, he slaughtered it for those who were going to eat it, and he had intent to spray it in step 4, not for those who are going to eat it. It's kosher, and he doesn't write that he had intention to do so actually at the time of zrika, because according to the Rambam, they're both kosher. He just wants to emphasize this novelty, that even at the time of shchita, and which comes to permit you to eat it, if he thought about spraying it for those who cannot eat it, the Pesach is kosher, because you do not have the thought of eating by the spraying of the dam, as opposed to arelim, uncircumcised, which would have taken effect at the time of the spraying of the blood. And so writes the Esav Mishnah: if he slaughtered it for those who are going to eat it, to spray it for those who are not going to eat the zevach, it's kosher. Here I found written that the same rule would apply if he sprayed the blood not for the people who are going to eat it. It is kosher. As the Mishnah writes, I found the same rule would apply if he sprayed the blood not for those who are going to eat it as kosher, because there's no concept of those who aren't going to eat it by spraying the blood, only at the time of shchita. As in the Gemara in Zvachim, you know why shchita is unique? Because on Pesach, if it's done for those who cannot eat it, it passes. It's a unique situation that only applies to Korban Pesach. The words of the Rambam, that if you slaughtered lo'echlov to spray it for shloi lo'echlov, the Pesach is kosher, and the person is not yotzei bo yedei chavosoi. But you still haven't fulfilled your obligation. We find this from Sochem 78b. And the words of the Rambam are a little different from the text in the Gemara we find this. It says the Pesach itself is kosher, and v'odam yotzei bo yedei chavosoi. Whereas we have that a person does fulfill his obligation. And the Rashi would seem that the text was like we have. Because in Psachim we find a disagreement of Mosdos and the Rabbanon. Mosdos is of the opinion that if he slaughtered it for those who are going to eat it, to spray the blood for those who are not going to eat it, the person who who's counted on it fulfills his obligations. The Machon say you don't fulfill your obligation because those who are counted on it cannot eat it. And if you can't eat it, then the korban is not technically not fulfilled because you don't have the ability to eat it. More questions. Man Tano, who is the one who learned, the Chacham said, that if you slaughtered it for those who can eat it, and he sprayed it for those who can't eat it, the Pesach it's kosher. And Rashi explains that it's kosher for what purpose of atonement and to bring the chelev, but you can't eat it. But he thought at the time of Zrika, for not for those who can't eat it, it's kosher, and we learn that a person does fulfill his obligation, even though he doesn't eat it. So Rashi has the text, and you fulfill your obligation. According to him, we have Gemara. In the beginning, they thought it was Rav Nosson, who thought that the eating of the Korban Pesach doesn't. In other words, if somehow a person didn't eat for the Korban Pesach, he still fulfilled his obligation. At the end, the Gemara explains it's going to the Chachomim that he fulfills his obligation because there's no concept of not for the eaters at the time of Zrikas Adam, and even everybody can eat it. It can even be eaten. According to the Rambam, we have to say, because it says he can't eat it, right? That the Gemara's question said it was like Amnosen. According to the Chachamim, the Korban is posel. Because by Zrikas Adam, he did it for those who can't eat it. The Gemara answers, no, you can't say that, because by Zrika, as we said before, there's no concept of not for those who eat it, and the Menuyim do not fulfill their korban with the korban that a machshava shelo oichlav bezrika makes the korban posel, but those who are counted on it do not fulfill their obligation of bringing their korban because it does posel it. There's a concept that the korban can be a kosher korban, but you haven't fulfilled your obligation. We find this when it's done shaloi l'baylim. You also find that the korban is kosher, just the baylim have to bring another korban. The Marie Korkis also explains from the Gemara, it would seem like the text of the Rambam. Because if the text is that you do fulfill your obligation, the word of Odom, it says that a person fulfills his obligation, would seem to be extra. Because he writes that the Pesach is kosher. The Gemara should have written the Pesach is kosher and you fulfill your obligation. And the word atzmoi is extra. It means only the korban is kosher, but you can't eat it. The korban is kosher. It would mean kosher that you can spray the blood and to bring them emurim, having to do with the aspect of the offering itself. But a little bit it's difficult. The Rambam writes the Pesach is kosher. He doesn't write the Pesach itself is kosher. So therefore the Rambam would seem to be saying that, like the text we have, that a person would fulfill his obligation, he could eat it. So Marie Korkis concludes that in those form that are those copies of the Rambam that are correct, you find the Giyas in the Rambam is that a person would fulfill his obligation, he would be able to eat from the Korban Pesach. Chaim questions the Rambam. He says if he slaughtered it to spray the blood for those who can't eat it is kosher, because the Gemara learns you have to be counted on the Korban. The Posuk, the double language of Michsas and Techoisu teaches us that if you're not counted, the Korban is not qualified. It is an edict in the Posuk that the Minui is only those who eat the Korban. But those who don't eat it, it doesn't apply to them. And therefore, when you slaughter the Korban on condition to throw the blood, not for those who are going to eat it, those that can't eat it, it doesn't take effect because the Pesach was done for the wrong owners. We learn in the beginning of Zvochem that a Pesach was slaughtered not for the ones who own it, it's postal. Why does the Rambam say that he's talking about spraying the blood for those who can't eat it. The Pesach is kosher because, as we said earlier, the application of eating doesn't apply to spraying, even though it won't become also because of the shlit, but still it does take the effect of being like for different owners, and therefore it should not be a valid korban. So Chaim says, we find in the Gemara that the concept of uncircumcised is not considered a change of ownership according to the Rabbah. So he learns the posuk, and it shall be accepted for him to atone for him on him and not on his friend. And his friend has to be like himself. To tell you that an oral, somebody who's uncircumcised, is not one who can have atonement. Since he can't have atonement, so therefore it has nothing to do with the korban. And Rav Chizdu disagrees, says the reasoning is that uncircumcised is obligated because he can circumcise himself, as we've learned before. Therefore, he's considered a part of the ability, having the ability to be counted. But they don't disagree that in order to be considered a change of owners, you have to be eligible for this korban. And the change of ownership, when you changed it for a person who can't be on this korban, that does not make it possible. It's only if somebody would be able to, as we find in the Gemara. A chatos, a person is obligated to bring for sin offering, and was slaughtered not for him, because for somebody else who doesn't have an obligation of a chatos, he has an obligation of a burnt offering, then it's kosher, because his friend could not bring a chatos, because the one who's bringing the burnt offering isn't obligated with a chatos. So too, by Korban Pesach, we slaughtered it for those who can eat it, and for those who cannot eat it, meaning people who are unable to eat it, they're considered similar to him, and therefore it doesn't pass with Shinui Balim because they're not eligible. The Pesach is kosher because they're not considered similar to him. Just that by an elderly or a sick person, we should have made it possible because it says shaloi lo'echlov. You can't slaughter it for somebody who can't eat it. Therefore, the Rambam explains that it's kosher because an elderly or a sick person are possible because they're considered not able to eat it, and there's no concept of eating when we come to the thought of spraying. Chaim continues. According to this, we understand very clearly the Rambam's reasoning that if he says la'alacha, that if he slaughtered it for those who can eat it, to spray the blood for those who cannot eat it, it's kosher. But you didn't fulfill your obligation. And the question was, if there's no concept of not eating by Srika, and the Pesach is kosher, why shouldn't he fulfill his obligations if at the time of slaughtering he thought to do it, to spray it for those who can't eat it? But according to us, we can understand, because there's a change of ownership. And the Rambam Paskins, a chatas that was slaughtered for me, that for someone who is obligated to bring a burnt offering, it's kosher. But the chatas is still, even though it's kosher, the Bible has to bring another chatos, because Shinu Balam, it is considered another Jew, and therefore, even though the korban doesn't become possible, he has to bring the owner, the one who had the chatos, has to bring a fresh chatos. Here too, the Rambam Paskins, the korbanos Pesach that were brought for Shinu Balam, even though the korban is kosher, the owners did not fulfill their obligation to bring a korban Pesach. Chaim also comes up with a novel approach that the Rambam is of the opinion that at the time of the being listed on the Korban Pesach, if he became sick and he can't eat, then at that moment he's no longer an owner, and this removes his ownership. And therefore, if there was a sick person that could not eat at the time of the Shrita, he's not a member. And therefore, when the Kohen thought of him at the time of Zrigas Adam, According to the Rambam, it would be Shinui Balim. It does not passel the Pesach, because Shinui Balim only passels by all the. It doesn't passel by all the korbanos. And if he sprays the blood to atone for somebody who doesn't need that korban, b'shar korbanos, it doesn't passel. So too on Pesach, that the choila who cannot eat is not mechuyev b'korban Pesach. Therefore, it's considered like he doesn't need that korban. Just like by all korbanos, if he thought of it as a wrong ownership, even though the korban is kosher, but if a person does not fulfill his obligation, so too by Pesach, since he sprayed it for the sick person, who can't eat it, even though the korban Pesach remains kosher, but the owners have not fulfilled their obligation. According to this, Reb Chaim says, we can explain the shita of Rabbeinu Hananel. Because Rabbeinu Hananel text in the Brisa is that if he slaughtered it for those who are going to eat it, to spray the blood for those who are not going to eat it, the Pesach is kosher. And the person fulfills his obligation. And in this rule, it would be somebody who's sick. Technically, he can't eat it at the time of the shchita. And it was slaughtered for him, it was sprayed for him. The korban doesn't become possible because of Shinim Baalim, because of change of ownership, because the choila will fulfill his obligation. Reb Chaim says that Rabbeinu Hananel is the opinion that you can put yourself on the korban and take it off from the korban Pesach is only when he can be someone who's part of the eligible people. If we can remove himself, put himself back on, and in the new count, he becomes a member of the second Pesach. But if he never became an owner because he can't eat, he's not considered from the owners of the korban, and therefore he doesn't fulfill his obligation. But that would not be the case by somebody who, at the time when he appointed himself, he could have eaten it, and at the time of the shchita he became sick. There you don't take off. That doesn't remove him from being counted. He was appointed. And if he was sick, and then afterwards he became well, at the time of the shchita, the Pesach will be brought for him as well. And he fulfills his obligation. Thus we find that even though he got sick, he remains counted on the Pesach. And since he's counted, therefore, he's not considered someone who's not an owner. Therefore, somebody who thinks about the sick person in such a situation is not considered a change of ownership. Furthermore, Reb Chaim says that anyone who was counted correctly, even if he became sick later, he's not removed automatically. And the korban is kosher because he's counted. The question is only the fact that he can't eat it. That doesn't passel. That doesn't nullify the korban either. Even though that anyone who can't eat it is considered he's not on it, this is not the case in such a situation, because the Mishnah says that if you slaughtered it for those who can't eat it or are not counted on it, it's kosher. So we see from the Mishnah that those who can't eat it is not the same type of a nullification as for those who aren't counted. And we learned also because he has both of them in there, and it's different than the psul of Shaloi Oichlov that makes it possible by shchita is talking only somebody who wasn't eligible to be counted to begin with, that it was forbidden to eat in the korban Pesach, like the oral. But somebody who was healthy and became sick, even though he can't eat it now, he remains an owner. Therefore, he's not considered a change of ownership. If the Kohen thought about him at the time of spraying of the blood, it doesn't passel the others from fulfilling their obligation. Now, Rabbeinu Hananel's text is very clear that if you slaughtered it oichlov, those who are going to eat it, on condition to spray the blood for those who can't eat it, the Pesach is kosher. The person fulfills his obligation. We can explain shoichtoi lo oichlov as talking that somebody was healthy when he counted himself, and therefore he's a member. Just at the time of shlit, he became sick. He can't eat it. But you don't take off from him the idea that he's a member of the group. And to spray the blood for those who can't eat it is talking about on the person who's actually counted on the korban as a sick person. He can't eat it tonight, since and it's not called a shiur balim because he's an owner. He remains an owner, just he can't eat it. We have the rule is that by zrika, even if he thought for the sick person, it has nothing to do with the eating, and he's an owner of the animal, of the korban. Therefore, he fulfills his obligation, even though he doesn't eat it at the end. And we can understand the text of Rabbeinu Hanan.